Yeah, thank you for your patience, everyone. Thanks for joining. And I guess let's get started. Some standard instructions before we get started into the session. I appreciate if everyone could mute their mic during the session, and for asking questions, the chat will be enabled after halftime into the session. Welcome to the session on strategies to mitigate cyber threats in public sector agencies. Today we have with us our esteemed guest speaker, and Kanan Srinivasan from
Hey.
GS Lab GAVS. He's the head of cybersecurity and data privacy. Kanan is a subject matter expert with over 21 years of experience in DevSecOps, cloud security, vulnerability management, access management, data protection, and privacy. He's also the risk officer who's responsible for ensuring security and risk management strategies at various global companies. He's the chief information security officer for a very large bank where he implemented Archer use case implementation using DevSecOps. And he's also the data protection and privacy head for a very large telecom company in Saudi Arabia. He's heading the third-party risk assessment for over 500 assessments for a leading life sciences organization based out of US. So welcome, Kanan.
Thank you.
And we have Gopal Mishra. He's the EVP of Strategy and Sales at V3iT. Gopal is a subject matter expert with over 20 years of experience, and he's serving public sector clients in US and including states, counties, port districts, higher ed, water and sewer departments, and various local independent agencies as well. He's a certified PMP expert. He's also expert in strategy planning, branding, channel development, alliance partnerships, maximizing revenue growth and strategy execution for V3iT. So welcome Kanan and welcome Gopal.
Thank you, Prachi.
So glad to have you both.
Thank you.
And I guess without further ado, let's get started on this discussion. Over to you, Gopal.
Thank you, everyone. And let me first talk to you about my experience over these years that I have worked with public sector. Like one is, I see lately last few years, the cybersecurity attacks keep on increasing year after year. Like last year, we saw like 14% increase. It has huge financial cost implications. Certainly, every breach that occurs, it causes increased cost of remediation there. And then there are some hidden losses that organizations occur. Now, when we talk about hidden losses, those are much more than just about the financial aspect of it. One of the agencies we work with a couple of years back, they were attacked by a ransomware, and for 2 weeks, the systems were down. Now, yeah, we were able to bring the systems up, but then again, the operations were completely disrupted. Sensitive data was breached. It was very hard to find out what was lost and what is not. And then there was a loss of public trust. So people were very, they were not able to trust the government, trust the agencies that they will be able to keep their data safe. Apart from this, when I see there is a lot of huge legal implications, compliance consequences that they had to go through. And some of the customers that I have worked with, even a small breach can cause even the national security risk, because the data that resides, the things that resides in the system is very sensitive for national security. So having said that, let me pass it on to Kannan. And Kannan, what do you think? We see all these implications continuously happening, and how do you see why they must be happening?
Yeah, thank you, Gopal. So the key reason, right? Why the public sector is being targeted, it's mainly because of the kind of data it holds and the critical infrastructure, it supports, right? Be it the power or water supply, and all the way up to the nuclear power plant, right? All these areas comes under the public sector. Now, you really look at it, like, I mean, the availability of the personal data by the the public sector, right? Like, I mean, be it the county level, it's significantly high, right? Uh, what really happens is, for hackers, if they are able to get your personal data and sell it in the dark web, like, I mean, they typically get around up to $50, depending upon the nature of the data. They get up to $50. So definitely, money is a key motivating factor here. And what also happens in the typical public sector is, because if we are working on any transformation, either there is an improper configuration, as a result, like, I mean, it becomes an easy target for the hackers to, like, I mean, easily get in and take the data out. And some of the uh, I've seen, many old legacy systems that are still being used, and there are no patches available. So as a result, like, I mean, it becomes an easy target. Hackers with, with minimal skill set, they'll be able to, like, easily crack in and able to get your the data out. And what also happens is, like, I mean, because the public sector, you deal with people day in and day out, and what really happens is, like, I mean, there are many scenarios where some of the staff are not well aware of the security process, be it phishing, or let's say if they get some kind of smishing and all these kind of things, like, I mean, no, they are not aware of it, and they tend to share some of the personal data. So these are potentially some of the reasons why the public sector is being targeted, because as I said, the data, right, like, I mean, it's valuable, and they can make huge amount of money, and because of some of the limitation, it becomes easy for them to access and get the data out. Now, if you really look at some of the issues that is being faced, right, like, I mean, when it I mean, as we said earlier, Gopal, like, I mean, like you rightly mentioned, the security spend typically in a public sector, right? Like, I mean, it's up to 3 to 5%. Whereas if you take the spend by a financial sector or a healthcare sector, it's significantly higher. So as a result, what really happens is, you are unable to focus, or, like, I mean, prevent or protect some of the critical assets, or you are unable to implement some of the latest tools, right? So as a result, what really happens is, you become easily prone to the ransomware attack. And uh, because your spend is low, and, let's say if there are some newer technologies, like, for example, zero trust, or if you have multiple third parties accessing your system. Let's say, for example, if your application is maintained by a third party, because of the regulation, and not all the organizations are properly vetted, and there is not enough check that happens in terms of, like, I mean, what kind of security controls they have protect yeah, the organization. And as a result of this, what really happened is, like, I mean, there are a lot of breach happening because of uh, not implementing some of the newer technologies, or, like, I mean, in not uh, ineffective operating controls, right? Like, I mean, because of this, like, I mean, the breaches do happen in the public sector area. Now, so what is happening today, right? Like, I mean, if you really look at it, the current government, right? Like, I mean, the federal government, they have come out with what is called as a national cybersecurity strategy, right? This is recently launched, and this webinar, like, in a way, it comes in the right time, where we'll definitely be able to focus on some of the key inputs, or the strategy shared by the federal government. So they are predominantly focusing on 5 key areas, right? Um, in terms of how are you going to protect your infrastructure, taking care of your threat actors, implementing, or, like, I mean, enforcing proper, the resilient uh, uh, infrastructure, plus making sure, like, I mean, all your the third parties accessing your applications are, like, I mean, thoroughly vetted. And many of you might ask, like, okay, does it going to improve? What is going to change, right? Like, I mean, there is a focus in terms of, like, I mean, why there is a additional budget that needs to be taken care of, and we are emphasizing on organizations to um, start implementing this, and there is focus to recognize this as a critical issue, and they have given a lot of guidelines in terms of, like, I mean, a strategy should be built, and within 180 days, like, I mean, they going to publish all the guidelines. So all these are going to happen as part of this strategy. Now, what is that, they are going to focus on, right? Like, I mean, so as I mentioned earlier, like, I mean, there are 5 key areas, and out of these 5 key areas, like, I mean, defend your critical infrastructure, right? What it means is, like, I mean, do you know how all your infrastructure? Have you accounted for all the assets that is there, in your organization? And what kind of controls you have put in place so that, it is taken care of? Like, for example, be it endpoint security, or there is enormous amount of focus in the new cybersecurity strategy to implement zero trust, right? So all these are some of the aspects, like, I mean, they are, focusing on. And next one is, uh, how resilient are your infrastructure? Meaning, um, we all know that, like, I mean, even if you have the best of the best controls, right? Like, I mean, there can be a scenario, or there could be a situation where, like, I mean, there could be an impact, or, like, I mean, an incident happening. Just to give you an example, right? I mean, last year we all know what happened when Log4j came in, right? uh, we were all using Log4j in our application, but one fine day just came to know that, like, I mean, hey, you know what, Log4j has a lot of vulnerabilities, and it definitely has to be taken care and addressed immediately. But if that kind of an attack, or, if there is an incident happens, how resilient is your organization? Do you have adequate controls in place so that even if something happens, you will still be able to, protect your data, and able to restore your systems, and bring it to production, with very, very minimal impact? And there is a clear focus in terms of, like, I mean, who are all your third parties? Have you um, done the risk assessment in terms of, like, I mean, what kind of data they access, and do they have adequate security controls in place to protect your data, right? So these are the key focus areas suggested by the National Cybersecurity Council. Now, if you take the risk mitigation, right? So looking at that, an organization can do, how can you protect, your organization? Where do you start, right? Like, I mean, this webinar is predominantly going to focus in terms of, like, I mean, what are all the issues? Where do you start so that you can start implementing some of these controls, and you'll be able to, with minimal effort, like, I mean, you can start, and still be able to address some of these concerns. First thing you need to do is do a risk assessment of your organization. Identify what are all the threats, what are all the and what are the potential vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So identify those, uh, clearly put a risk heat map so that you'll be able to uh, pick the top risk items and start focusing on it immediately. Initiate third party risk assessment, right? And revisit your policies in terms of, like, I mean, whether you have the mobile device management policies there in place, remote working is the address in your policy, and how are you going to take care of your third party? So revisit your policies, make sure, you have all these aspects are taken care of. typically it is a best practice to do the policy review at least once a year, right? So uh, my request to all of you is like, I mean, do the review your policies and standard, and last but not the least, like, I mean, have the uh, governance structure in place, right? I mean, when I say governance structure, it should not just be with the CISO organization, right? You have to start involving your the CXO level and the senior management in terms of like, I mean, the role they play, what kind of support, how they recognize the security issues, and they give the right focus to address some of the security issues. Now, um, what happens is like, I mean, in many scenarios, the physical security aspects is always like, overlooked. Meaning, I've seen many data centers where you don't even have a proper access management control in place so that anyone can walk and take the data out. You don't have what is called as a clean desk policy, meaning if an employee leaves in the evening, right? Like, I mean, if they leave critical information at their desk, it's always possible that like, somebody with a malicious intent can take the picture. In today's world, like, I mean, it's so easy to take a picture using your mobile phone. So how are you going to protect your physical security, making sure you have the firewall and all the other aspects are there, like, and it is protected and nobody can, and there is a proper access control that is put in place to secure it. So next one is, do you have a security monitoring team, or what we call it as a security operations center team, which is continuously monitoring that threat? Like, I mean, there are a lot of organizations, or like, I mean, paid tools, like for example, Cybele and all the other tools. Like, I mean, you get threat intelligence, right? So is there a team who is constantly monitoring these threat intelligence, gathering the data, try to see what is the impact, or like, I mean, do a threat hunting to see like, I mean, is there anything can be that is vulnerable in the organization, and do the user behavior analytics, try to see like, I mean, are there any threats that can exploit your organization. And next one is, have a good identity and access management process in place, meaning uh, do you have a proper RBAC in place? When I say RBAC, like, I mean, role-based access control. um, Are you, validating your joiner, leaver, and movers, uh, multi-factor authentication, single sign-on? So bring in some of these best practices. And last but not the least, like, I mean, have conduct periodic training. Meaning this is extremely important, right? Like, I mean, your employees are the weakest link, right? Like, I mean, so how are you going to train them so that they will be able to identify some of the phishing emails, or like, I mean, they'll be able to identify if there are any security related incidents are going on, and they highlight it to the right team, right? So that some of the mitigation strategies, like, that we can focus on. Now this, I want to do some kind of a deep dive in terms of how we can start addressing the core controls, right? Like, I mean, if you look at the cybersecurity strategy, they are clearly talking about zero trust model. So zero trust model, right? Like, I mean, it addresses six key areas. Like, one is network, application, identity. So there are six key data. So there are six key areas. Like, I mean, it focuses on. And my kind suggestion would be like, I mean, this is again one of the best practices being followed is now many um, financial and the bank, the banking and the healthcare clients, like, I mean, they've already started implementing some kind of a zero trust model, especially in the network related areas. So what happens is like, I mean, um, you know, moving forward, they really want to like, I mean, discard VPN and other technology. Instead, uh, they want to have a zero trust model using tools like, for example, Zscaler or Netscope. These are some of the most popular tools, being widely used. So using these tools, right? you will be able to access a particular application without using a VPN, or there is an element of zero trust that built in, meaning it always validate whether if you are the right person, and it doesn't trust you, right? Like, I mean, it doesn't the principle is trust no one and validate every time, right? Like, I mean, so it checks if you are the right person. It gives you access only to that particular application, and if you have to connect to a particular port, it opens that port to access that application. Whereas if you try to connect, using that port, or like, I mean, if you try to do something different, it immediately, like, blocks it. Meaning, to give you an example, um, let's say, um, if I'm the user, I have an admin access to connect to the corporate network or to connect to a particular server. It clearly um, gives permission only, like, when I use this particular activity. Whereas if it has other scenarios, like, I mean, no, it will not allow me to do it. So what happens by doing this is clearly, the access wise, like, it's completely taken care of. There is a element of app level the segregation, so that um, users are given only to the particular the application or the activity that he is working on. This way, you will be able to uh, prevent, or like, I mean, no stop some of the data loss that's happening. And even if there are any hackers, or like, I mean, if there is any malicious actor inside your network, they will not be able to send any data to any third parties, or like, I mean, no, to their site, right? Like, I mean, so this is how a typical zero trust ZTNA, right? Like, I mean, the from the network wise, like, I mean, no, this is how it protects. And similarly, there are multiple strategies available to protect your application data and identity. So my kind request is, like, I mean, because this is also one of the strategy being covered as part of the current law. Like, I mean, no, you have to start focusing on it, and making sure, like, I mean, you identify and see how you can start implementing the zero trust model in your organization. Next one, right? Like, I mean, public sector, right? There is access to the let's say your multiple IoT devices. So what it means is, if you take an example of a typical hospital, right? Let's say, um, have you identified all your IoT devices, right? So first thing you need to do is, like, I mean, where are all your IoT devices, SCADA devices that I know that are there in your organization? Um, have you done any risk assessments? Meaning, every device, IoT devices, like, I mean, now either it could be very old, right? At least some 7, 8 years old, or so have you done any risk assessment of late, right? To know what are all the vulnerabilities that are there, and uh, what are the ways by which, like, I mean, you can apply the mitigation methodologies. Meaning, uh, what I'm trying to do is, today we do what is called as a micro segmentation, right? Like, I mean, so are you limiting the exposure to keep all these in a separate VLAN, and make sure, like, I mean, your risk is kind of reduced, or like, I mean, content is what, like, I mean, you need to do by applying some of the mitigation strategies. In there are any patches or vulnerable, I mean, hardening that can be performed, you have to start harden those the infrastructure as well. And last thing is, like, I mean, if any of your IoT devices, if they are being used or if they are remotely connected, because I give you an example of a typical healthcare industry, right? Like, I mean, if you look at any MRI, or these kind of machines in the hospital, right? Like, I mean, the typical life of these kind of MRI and other machines are, like, I mean, 10 to 15 years. So I still I know many of the the hospitals, they still use um, Windows XP, Windows 7 kind of devices. Uh, as we all know, like I mean, there is no patch and other things available for these machines, and because the devices are so expensive, you just can't discard it just because you want to upgrade it to Windows 10, right? Now, this kind of situation, we implement what is a tool like a Medicaid, right? And even Microsoft Defender is also like they are going to enhance it, and they are going to come out with the newer features to address the IoT area. Now, implement some of these tools. Try to understand like I mean what kind of data that it is sending. Uh, it will also like I mean help in identifying the vulnerabilities and help you to do the uh, micro segmentation so that it completely uh, takes care of what kind of data that it is sending, and it keeps inspecting and see that like I mean if there are uh, uh, any attack or like I mean anything that is happening in the IoT devices. So definitely this is one of the key area that you should start focusing and addressing on. Next one is just want to quickly touch upon like I mean how the typical ransomware attack sequence happens, right? Um, it usually happens uh, very easily, right? I mean in terms of let's say if I'm a hacker, if I have a very malicious intent, I can just send you a spam email saying, hey, there is a great offer going on. I look so genuine, right? I mean that you will be like kind of forced or like I mean compelled to open that particular email. And the moment you open the mail, right? Like I mean, then I have access to your environment. I sit on in your environment, and I do what is called as a lateral movement. What it means is, um, let's say your IP address is 10.20.30.40, right? From there, I'll keep pinging what all the IPs that I can reach. Let's say from uh, 45 is accessible, right? I mean, then I go to that particular IP and I keep moving laterally till the time, right? Like, I mean, I have access to your data. Meaning, um, I'll do this till the time, let's say, for example, if it is a file or like, I mean, uh, database. So once I've done that, right, I will not send the entire data in one go. Instead, I'll keep sending it, to a remote site in a very small chunks that your firewall and other devices may not be able to immediately identify. So once I do that, I have access to all your critical data. Then what happens is I send a mail saying I have access to your data. Either you pay the ransom. I mean, at that time I would have logged your mission. I put some, I encrypt your mission and give a message saying like, hey, I have access to your data. Either you pay this ransom or I will expose this data. Let's say if you decide like, what, I will not pay it or, do it. Uh, in a worst case scenario, they will start exposing your the critical data in the dark web. This is a typical attack sequence. So here, the reason why I wanted to highlight this attack sequence is so that you are completely aware in terms of like, I mean, why, um, the user awareness, it makes, it's really important. I'm going to talk about it in the subsequent slide, but if you understand this concept, it makes it all the more easy for me to explain in the subsequent slides. So as I said, if you look at this slide, right, like I mean spam and how can I easily get into. So one of the option is like I mean in today's world, your many organizations, you depend on third parties develop the application to maintain the application, and multiple product vendors, right? Like I mean they connect to your environment to uh, to the patching, or like I mean if there is any issue with your device, like I mean they connect and they do the analysis. Now if they are not aware of some of these aspects, right? I mean, that's when the problem starts coming in. So it makes it all the more important to identify who are all your key vendors, do an assessment in terms of like, I mean, what kind of data they have. I mean, if they have access to the critical data, have a detailed questionnaire, making sure like, I mean, do they have a SOC report? If you are allowing your third party to access your PCI data, make sure like, I mean, they have all these controls in place. And if they have access to the healthcare data, like, I mean, what kind of controls they have, like, I mean, be it HIPAA, right, rest those kind of controls that is there, and how often, they do the VAP, vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. So do this assessment and try to see, are they protecting their environment? And in turn, like, I mean, are they protecting your organization, right? Like, I mean, that is something like, I mean, you need to assess and make sure you are convinced with it. If they are not doing their remediation on time, then you definitely need to take a call in terms of like, I mean, uh, ask them to, define the timeline. And if they are still not complying, like, I mean, how do you reduce the risk in terms of like, I mean, uh, giving only the access to the application, or terminate the contract. Like, I mean, that could be the last step, but still, uh, these are the aspects, like, I mean, that you definitely need to take care of. So this is another area where the entire industry is focusing on, meaning adaptive authentication. So as I said, um, if I'm a user and every day I go to my office and I log in from a particular IP, uh, right? So I know for sure, like, I mean, okay, hey, this is a genuine, person who's trying to access. Of course, with the zero trust principle, I'll also make sure, like, I mean, whether, it's if we are the right person, but still, if the, if I'm connecting from the same place, that means my risk is less. Whereas if my ID is being like, I mean, used to log in, let's say, for example, today in California, tomorrow in New York. So you have to implement what is called as a risk-based authentication, meaning try to see, like, I mean, why this person is accessing from, multiple places, and either ask for an additional set of authentication, so that uh, you can show what is called as, like, I mean, a multi-factor authentication, send them an SMS, or like, I mean, allow them to use the authenticator, get it validated whether if it is the right person. And if you are getting hits in a, let's say, for example, if your employee is accessing your office network in the night, uh, and there is no need for an employee to access at that time, right? Like, I mean, make sure you keep checking if that is the right person, meaning by number one, uh, having a multi-factor authentication, and do a thorough check, like, I mean, that is accessing only to the right applications and so on, right? That all these can be done by using what is called as a risk-based authentication. And when I talk about this, I also would like to touch upon having a good mobile device management in place, so that even if we are using, if you are allowing, they bring your own device, you will still be able to uh, take care of your environment. Meaning, um, using tools like, for example, Intune, right? It completely containerizes your office data so that nobody can take it out. Number one, and number two, it enforces you to have a pin-based authentication. It will force you to, like, I mean, change the password every 30 to 45 days. So all these can be enforced by having a good mobile device management tool in place, right? Uh, Microsoft, Intune, all the others, like, I mean, you have this feature readily available. So if you just start leveraging it, you will be able to protect the data not only in the laptop, but also in the bring your own devices being used by your employees. So next one is, I would like to touch upon data protection, right? Um, Clearly, it's a focus area, and Do you have, in a nutshell, what I would like to highlight here is, do you know what kind of data that is being used in the organization, and do you have a complete inventory of where that data is being passed? And meaning application A, that is where I have my all the users enrollment details, and if there are like 5 downstream systems, right? Do you keep track of all the downstream applications, what kind of data that is being passed, and do you classify your data, meaning, hey, these are my personal data, sensitive personal data, and if that is passed from one application to another, or if it is sending it as a data feed, are you enforcing the right level of controls to protect it? When I say right level of control, let's say you do what is called as a masking, encryption, tokenization, so that even if the data is sent or if accidentally revealed, you'll still be protected. And for all your the uh, sensitive data, right? I mean, be it sensitive or the personal data, are you doing the proper masking when it is sent to the lower environment? Meaning, if your production data, I know many organizations use your production data for testing in the UAT and the development environment, but are you doing the right level of masking? Are you making sure the SSN numbers of and other critical data are completely masked, right? So these are the controls that you need to really put in place to make sure your the data is protected throughout its journey, and make sure you have the right uh, a policy in place so that when the data is discarded, right, you cannot, meaning every data, right, I mean, you need to clearly have how long this data is going to be used. Archival and retention policies should be defined, and when the retention policy, let's say if it is 5 years or 7 years, depending upon the business requirement, make sure you clearly delete those data, and if there are multiple disks, uh, you know you discard it in a most secured way, right? Next one is, I touched upon this topic about the cyber resilience, right? So what it means is I have done whatever best possible, right? Like, I mean, to protect my environment, but still there is always an element of unwanted incident happening. As a result, your there could be an incident that can compromise, and infrastructure may not be available, but you have adequate protection, and will you be able to restore your application? Are you resilient enough so that even if anything happens, like, I mean, you'll be able to recover your system in a much short span of time without any data loss, right? So on the right hand side, like, I mean, if you look at it, like, I mean, these are the typical cybersecurity framework controls, right? Like, I mean, how do you protect? Do you have the adequate control to identify and detect if there are any issues that is going on, or will you be able to, like, I mean, detect, any unwanted events that are happening? And if that happens, like, I mean, how soon you will be able to respond to those incident and recover your application so that uh, your business is not affected, right? So this you need to ensure, like, I mean, what is taken care of. And my kind suggestion to all of you is, do a uh, at least once or twice a year, do a tabletop exercise whenever you are making any major architecture change. Do a tabletop exercise and make sure you at least do a full recovery test at least once a year, right? So by doing this, you know for sure how much time it is going to take for you to recover your system, what are all the dependencies, and in case if you have missed out any critical aspects, like, I will still, you'll be able to identify and put a process to address it. So that is from the control perspective, but from the maturity, right? So start with basic controls, protect it against your the common attacks that I just mentioned, and ultimately what you need to do is, are you associating? I mean, let's say you have the application, but is it really catering to the business need? Meaning, if the business wants the application to be up and running, within 2 hours of RTO, but is your infrastructure support to that? And if the business is looking for a say 15 minutes RPO or a real-time RPO, meaning recovery point objective, meaning how much amount of data that I can lose, right? Is it really catering to their need? And accordingly, you need to you have to basically revisit your infrastructure so that uh, it addresses the business need. And at the end of the day, like the business objectives are completely taken care of. So with that said, these are some of the key areas that I wanted to touch upon. So if you really look at it, just to summarize, right? Um, we talked about the national cybersecurity strategy that is published by the government, and what are the areas that they are talking about, right? How do you start protecting your critical infrastructure all the way to the third party systems. And then we touched upon the zero trust model, because that is one of the key requirements suggested by uh, the cybersecurity strategy. So what is it you want to do where do you start to implement the zero trust model? And do you have the adequate governance process in place? Do you have the C-level connect? And what is the senior management commitment to uh, understand the importance of cybersecurity, and they give the right adequate support for what you're trying to protect, right? So these are the areas that you need to focus on and start, uh, you know, and make sure you build a resilient infrastructure, of your organization. So with that said, I have covered from the topics. Maybe Prachi, Gopal, would you like to add anything more? Gopal?
Yeah, thanks, Kanan. Great presentation. Really insightful, I must say. Meanwhile, yeah, Gopal is also here. We have some questions also from the audiences.
Yes, please.
Um, so Rohit is asking, what legal or regulatory requirements do organizations need to be aware of when it comes to cybersecurity?
Yes, there are many. So just to give you an example, right? If you are a healthcare organization, you definitely need to take care of HIPAA. If you are accessing or if you are allowing your users to use the credit card, you need to abide by the PCI rules. Uh, if you are a financial institution, you definitely need to take care of FedRAMP. Healthcare industry, some of the life sciences, they have to take care of the FDA, 21. These are some of the regulations that are there, which organizations should take care of. While we do this, there is no mandate that you have to implement ISO 27001, but uh, some of these ISO controls are, it's mainly to give you the confidence that you have the right structure in place, and it gives you a confidence that your controls are, number one, implemented properly, it is audited properly, and it is effective and addressing the risk, right? So um, these are the components, as I mentioned, but ISO and NIST are some of the framework that helps you to address on how to implement this.
Right, and then actually that is exactly where public sector seems to be still catching up with the various compliance standards. There are guidelines. It is slowly maturing, but we don't have something similar to SOX, which started many years back for public sector,
Correct.
like agencies, or we don't have GDPR regulations, kind of things for public sector. So while we see it is still establishing itself in public sector, but there are so many guidelines, like you mentioned, HIPAA and others, which can be referred to come up with the internal structure to start abiding by and mitigating the risk.
That's right. Next question, Prachi.
Yeah, thanks, Gopal. What steps can I take to prevent a cyber attack from happening in the first place?
Okay.
Sachin is asking.
Okay. So first thing you need to do right immediately is do a risk assessment, do a thorough risk assessment of your organization, identify what are all the high risk. Let's say, for example, if your application doesn't have an encryption in place, right? If you are still using HTTP, so immediately these are some of the high risk. So identify the high risk, and for those high risk, determine what is the impact, right? So let's say, for example, if it is an application where you don't even have any personal data or a critical data, right? If it is using HTTP or a self-signed certificate, it's fine. But if it is your crown jewel application, you definitely have to get the a certificate from the authorized source, and uh, you have adequate controls in place uh, to ensure that data is not accessible from outside. Meaning, this you'll be able to do it by doing a vulnerability assessment and a penetration testing. So if you ask me, start with a risk assessment and do a VAPT of your environment. This will give you a very good idea in terms of, like, I mean, what are your high risk, and from there, like, I mean, you start putting a remediation plan to address those risks. Next one. Thank you.
Another question we have is, how can I stay up to date on the latest developments and best practices in cybersecurity?
Okay, that's a very good question. Now, if you ask me, right, like, I mean, this is exactly what uh, I mean, until recently, like, I mean, it need not be the case, or you can still choose to be like, hey, I have my environment, it's working fine, so why should I disturb this, right? But the current the cybersecurity strategy that is published by the government, right? Like, I mean, this is exactly what they are emphasizing, meaning you have the adequate budget to focus on what is happening in the market today. Are you catching up with some of the key risks? I mean, so it kind of enforces you to start looking at it and come out with an approach on how to do this. And as I, mentioned earlier, right? Like, I mean, do a risk assessment that and do a gap assessment, right? Like, I mean, that will clearly tell you where you are today and what is it, like, I mean, you are really missing out. Meaning, if you involve the right team to do, I mean, a third party to do a risk assessment with their experience working for multiple organizations, they know what kind of controls that should be there for a typical organization. And when, as part of the risk report, right? Like, I mean, they'll say these are the 10 areas you are still having the old technology, or, like, I mean, the old process, and this is how you need to address it to bring it to the current the stage, right? So start with a good risk assessment, and it will definitely, you'll be able to address some of these concerns. Next one, Prachi.
Yeah. Next question from Gaurav is, what role does artificial intelligence play in cybersecurity, and how can it be leveraged to enhance our defenses?
Very good question. So artificial intelligence in today's this thing, right? Like, I mean, as I mentioned, I touched upon the adaptive authentication, right? So are you the right person? Like, I mean, let's say, for example, if Gaurav, or if you are accessing uh, your office network from your home, or, like, I mean, from the office, whereas if I get the it from somewhere other place, like, I mean, by having a good A and ML, right? Like, I mean, you'll you'll be able to see, like, I mean, hey, this is a risk. I mean, I see something different. Like, I mean, it immediately, it's not like, it's a post activity. Instead, like, I mean, it protects, or it prevents you from even accessing the application itself. Now, take another scenario, right? Um, today, uh, many organizations have implemented what is called as a SIEM tool, right? Um, Now, with the A and ML, we are focusing on, like, I mean, how can we bring in uh, the automated orchestration, wherein, uh, let's say, if I'm logging into an environment 40 times or 50 times within, like, I mean, 2 minutes or 3 minutes, So earlier, it will keep a log of it, and then it will alert saying like, hey, somebody is trying to do, making an attempt to log in. Whereas with AI and ML capabilities, you'll be able to say that, what, immediately like, log this account, or uh, just don't allow this connection at all, right? Like, you'll be able to come out with these kind of uh, automation, and today we are implementing these kind of AI use cases in many of our clients. But definitely AI is, in cybersecurity is definitely it's a blessing, and there are many organizations today. Especially the security tools organizations are focusing heavily on implementing the AI ML use cases.
Right, Kannan. Actually, even I have seen like people use it, like the example you gave for incident response. I have seen people use it for vulnerability management. They have used it for behavior analysis, like how the loggings are happening. They have used for threat intelligence. So you're right.
Yes.
Yeah, it continues to expand it in reach for the security tools. Yeah.
Right. And it kind of automates, right? Like, some of, let's say, for example, threat hunting, right? So it's a laborious, and it requires somebody with right skill set to do these kind of activities, meaning look into the threat intel sources, and do a threat hunting to see, like, are there any weak points in your organization. It requires a, good red team, uh, do these kind of activities. They come with the skill set and years of experience. But with AI and all this coming up, and there are some of these capabilities built in the tool itself, right? Like, it automatically. I recently, like, I was in a conference where they said it will automatically do a penetration testing, and it will start addressing some of the issues. So that is where the market is heading towards.
Great inputs. One last question. I know we are running short on time. One last question I have for you, Kanan, is how can we make sure the effectiveness of our cybersecurity strategy and ensure that we are making progress over time?
Yes. So first thing you need to do is have a clearly defined, bring in the cyber governance in place, right? If your organization is, uh, uh, you know, if you don't have a cyber governance, like, have the governance, so that uh, you define what is called as the short term and the long term goals. Have a vision. Start, uh, defining this strategy, and address, uh, and come out with a plan in terms of, like, how are you going to achieve this. So merely putting up uh, the plan is not going to help. You need to have uh, an internal audit and an external audit in place, so that they constantly keep checking in terms of, yes, I have put in the controls, but does that control, like, really help in protecting your organization? And by doing an external assessment, right? Like, it gives you a view in terms of, like, um, what are the other risks they see, which your internal team is not able to do it. And have a C-level connect, have the senior management connect periodically to highlight where you are with respect to, the in securing the organization. If you feel there are any open risk and that requires management attention, you have to start building a business case, not just by saying, I want this tool to protect, this thing. Instead, what happens if I don't do this, or if I don't have a this particular tool, right? What is going to be the impact to the organization? Meaning, many of us, what really happens is, like, we always ask for a tech, the tool, but instead, like, we fail to address what is called as, like, what is going to be the business impact. And that is exactly the challenge that I've always seen. Like, when you go to the senior management, they really struggle to understand. Like, if you go to a CFO, or, like, CEO, they struggle to understand, like, why they are asking for this tool. Why can't they, just do it without it? My operations are running fine today, but why why they're asking for this tool, right? But you, as a cybersecurity professional, you are responsible for building that business case, highlight the risk in a right way, get that budget approval, and have this, you know, a strategy implemented and followed up, right? Like, I mean, so these are the things, like, I mean, that we should take care of. So by doing this, and I'm sure we will all be able to build a good cyber resilient organization and protect our organization's data.
Great inputs. Thank you, Kanan. Thanks, Gopal. Thank you, everyone, especially Kanan, Gopal, and the lovely audience who participated in the discussion today. Really appreciate it. And I know we have a lot of questions. I certainly do. But time is running short and we have other engagements. So really appreciate all the inputs and all the time you have given here. And it was great meeting all of you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.